It's November 1884 in Berlin. All major European nations are holding a conference. On the agenda, or on the map, the fate of Africa. An imperialist scramble to carve up the continent for colonial possessions and economic extraction. If the main building blocks of international relations are sovereignty and states, what did that mean for the colonial regions and peoples in the world? In this video, we are going to explore post-colonialism in international relations, a critical theory told by the survivors of colonialism and imperialism. Post-colonialism theory focuses on the history and the impacts of colonialism and imperialism on modern-day global politics of the formerly colonized regions. The term post by no means suggests that the effects of colonialism are long behind. Post-colonial studies are traditionally situated in the humanities that emerged in the 1970s and were introduced as a critical approach to international relations later on. The pursuit of more positivist and scientific approaches to international relations reduced the field to terms like anarchy, states, and power. But this scientific lens often overlooked power structures like European imperialism and colonialism. If mainstream IR theories like realism and liberalism see the international system as an anarchy, post-colonial scholars see it as a hierarchy. If Marxist theory focused on economic class struggle, post-colonial theory demonstrated how race and culture also shaped history and IR. Here we find the first main critique of post-colonial theory: the disregard of colonialism and imperialism, and the Eurocentric nature of marginalizing non-Western perspectives and experiences. Eurocentrism can be viewed as a systemic approach that places Europe and the West at the center of history, politics, and knowledge creation. So to understand post-colonial theory a bit better, we need to go back in history. When did colonialism start, and how was it maintained? Colonialism was a political economic period in history where European nations explored, conquered, and exploited large areas of the world. The age of modern colonialism began about 1500 and lasted until the mid-20th century. At some point, up to 80 to 90% of the global landmass and a majority of the world's population had come under direct or indirect colonial rule of European empires. This age of imperialist rise went hand in hand with the expansion and rise of merchant classes and early capitalism. Besides the new upcoming power imbalance, the empires of Europe created various racist and imperialist notions to justify the violent occupation of the colonized nations. With the end of the European Empire after the Second World War, the process of decolonization was inevitable. The main difference was how states would achieve independence, through peaceful or violent means.
France throws the bulk of its military manpower into the Algerian rebellion, which daily assumes the proportions of total war.
One of the most brutal conflicts during the decolonization period was the Algerian War of Independence, where it's estimated that over 1 million Algerians lost their lives. Among the participants was the psychoanalyst and philosopher Frantz Fanon, who, as a psychiatrist, witnessed the violence firsthand and presented the mental and physical toll on both the colonized and the colonizer in his book, The Wretched of the Earth. The book set the stage of the development of political consciousness in the colonized nations. Fanon's deeply unsettling argument was that in the decolonization process, violence was not just inevitable, but it was necessary and justified. In his view, the colonized man liberates himself in and through violence. And colonialism is not a machine capable of thinking, a body endowed with reason. It is naked violence and only gives in when confronted with greater violence. Even though for Fanon, violence served as a cleansing role for the colonized people, he argued the phase of spontaneous violence must be quickly superseded. For a war of national liberation to be successful, violence cannot be left uncontrolled, and a humanist national consciousness should be developed. For colonialism to work, it had to be accepted by the people living in the European empires. So what can explain this passivity and acceptance of brutal exploitation? Edward Said, a Palestinian-American academic who, in 1978, published Orientalism, where he systematically demonstrated how the West, via journalism, literature, academia, and other cultural forms, has constructed an image of the Orient, the East. The book is widely considered one of the founding texts for post-colonial theory. In the age of English and French imperialism, it was this binary cultural systematic approach that defined the East as the other, as a backward and uncivilized people and regions. This process did not happen only through imaginations and stereotypes, but it also had an underlying power hierarchy in the production of knowledge and creation of the uncivilized East. To believe that the Orient was created, or, as I call it, Orientalized, and to believe that such things happen simply as a necessity of the imagination is to be disingenuous. The relationship between Occident and Orient is a relationship of power, of domination, of varying degrees of a complex hegemony. For Said, Orientalism was based on exteriority, on the fact that the Orientalist, poet or scholar, makes the Orient speak, describes the Orient, renders its mysteries plain for and to the West. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, he didn't just bring soldiers, but also a large number of scholars to survey and catalog the Orient. What followed was a constructed European academic view that supported the civilizing mission of the French versus the decaying East. It is precisely the work of the postcolonial theorist Gayatri Spivak, which asked the obvious question: if knowledge is created in the West, then who speaks for the colonized people? In her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, Spivak suggests that the Western expert that Said spoke of continued to represent the interests of marginalized groups. Spivak used the term subaltern to describe colonial populations who are the subject of research and academic discourse, arguing that for postcolonial studies to be truly representative, they must include the voices of those same populations. If most scholars focused on the duality of colonized versus colonizer, the critical theorist Homi Bhabha introduced some new concepts that enriched and challenged the post-colonial debate. Bhabha explored the immersion of cultures that occurs as a result of colonization in a process called hybridization. Some obvious examples can be the English tea culture or India's love for cricket as a sport, but most of the time there were examples like Lord Macaulay, who was involved in institutionalizing education in India. He wanted to create anglicized Indians and famously advocated for a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Hybridity here can be seen in colonized people adopting the colonizer's values and behaviors as a survival tactic, known as mimicry. However, there are issues with these concepts, as they can seem to undermine the power imbalances inherent in colonization. After the Second World War, colonization ended, so what took its place? As mentioned, postcolonialism sees the global order in more of a hierarchical nature, and this power structure didn't disappear when the former colonies gained independence and created sovereign nations. What has taken its place is a different type of neocolonialism, characterized by economic dependency and division of labor and knowledge under global capitalism. The term neocolonialism was popularized by Kwame Nkrumah, the first Prime Minister of Ghana. In his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, published in 1965, he claimed, "The neocolonialism of today represents imperialism in its final and perhaps its most dangerous stage. The essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent, and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system, and thus its political policy, is directed from outside." Post- and neocolonial scholars have mostly moved away from geographic control towards a new economic dependency and exploitation. A global hierarchy is still evident in the structures of power, often described as the global north and global south divide. The device you are probably watching this video is a great example. The cobalt is mined in the Congo, a former Belgian colony, under horrific conditions, produced in Asia, designed in California, and the profits made from transnational corporations are funneled through tax havens. Neocolonialism's focus on dependency theory renders the theory more within the umbrella of the Marxist view of international relations, which we covered in another video, so we won't go much more into it. You can check it out on our channel. So far, we've explored postcolonial theory and didn't cover its critique in international relations studies. The main critique is that it focuses too much on a cultural and civilizational approach, contradictory to a more scientific approach. By focusing on the cultural differences during the colonial period, it creates static, binary concepts of colonizers versus colonized, without aspirations and progress towards universal values. Additionally, this form of duality that extends only to West versus non-West lines reproduces its own form of Eurocentrism, highlighted by blind spots of non-Western imperialist powers like the Ottoman Empire and Japan. Some well-intentioned critique is also about the academic writing being extremely dense and full of technical jargon, making it very difficult to understand and broaden the reach of the discipline. And finally, a solely historical and cultural approach doesn't seem well suited to address some of the other emerging political and economic structures of the modern world. This was our review of postcolonial theory. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.